This is a short tutorial about language analysis, one of many that I've done actually on my channel. So if you want to have a look at other language videos, then please look at my language playlist. This is AQA, this is paper 1 question 2, and I'm going to start by showing you a number of words that I give my students to do with talking about the effects on readers and impacts on readers, and then we're going to look at an example question showing you the process of how to analyse the extract and then how to turn all of this into a response at the end. So to begin with, let's look at a selection of words that are always imperative to use in terms of effects or impacts on readers. All of these words are the same really, they mean the same thing. Some of them you might be familiar with more than others, but it's all to do with this idea that the text is a construction, the text has been created to entertain us, and therefore the language analysis question is asking us to think about the impact of the writer's choice of language on us, how we perceive, I suppose, what is being described to us in the extract. So all of these words would demonstrate to the examiner that you are consciously analysing the writer's craft. So at the end, when I go through an example, I'm going to be using some of these to show what it looks like. Let's turn to a question. How does the writer use language to describe the weather conditions? A typical worded paper 1 question 2 task for language. And the extract says, above the sinister ocean, the brave lighthouse watched the horizon. It would not succumb to the whistling and hateful waves, but remain bravely fixed to the spot. Overhead, gulls shrieked with their wings outstretched like a ship's sail. And at that moment an explosive wave brought plumes of white salty spray over the solitary building. So solitary means on its own. Succumb means it would not kind of give into the hateful waves. So that is the extract for language. Okay, so I would just ask you to just pause a second and look at this extract and notice if you can see any words which share the same connotation, words that all really mean the same thing. Do you notice here a pattern or a semantic field of words, a family or a group of words that all share the same meanings? And I would obviously in the exam, I always say to my students, taking a highlighter, because you need to actively engage with their extracts. Don't be afraid of them. You've got to jump into them. You've got to show the examiner who's boss and that you're not afraid of language. So do you see here in this extract a particular pattern of words which all share the same meaning? Here are those words. The words that I've highlighted in green could be all lumped together into the same pattern or the same semantic field. Sinister, brave, whistling, hateful, shrieked, explosive, plumes. They all share the same kind of connotation of kind of very violent and aggressive meanings and imagery. This is not a weather. This is not weather which is kind of quiet or peaceful, is it? It's a very dramatic, very loud, almost out of control depiction of the weather. And that's exactly how the writer wanted to show it to you. They deliberately used language to create that effect. So we're noticing here a pattern or a trend of words, or sometimes called a semantic field. They all kind of share this almost like warlike imagery. So we need to think about terminology. The icing on the cake is always to try and identify the correct term for these words. We've got 4 adjectives there, you can see at the bottom, 2 verbs and a noun. So again, terminology isn't everything. It's more about the effects on readers, but if you can identify the correct type of word, then it would just give you the edge. It is part of the mark scheme anyway. So see if you can identify what type of word you think it is. This is something that I always start with my students because I often find that this is what they need a little bit of practice on, how to differentiate between different word classes. If you can go into the exam knowing them, it makes it so much more likely that you'll be successful with the language questions, but also question 4s as well. So if we're going to depict this imagery in pictures, then this is what the writer is trying to recreate for you. A very out of control, dramatic, loud, furious ocean. which is pummeling the cliffs and turning people's umbrellas inside out because of the strength of the wind. So you can see from this imagery here that this is what the writer is trying to recreate for you in your own mind. And it's the language that will do that. So we now need to ask ourselves, how is the writer then conveying this storm? How have they done this? What words would we use to describe this? So we've got there a long list of, most of them adjectives, to describe the storm is violent, aggressive, antagonistic, brutal, ruthless, and so on. So I would definitely be getting my students to use some of those words in their response because it shows that they have interpreted the extract correctly. If I think about connotations, for me, this text reminds me of a battlefield or a war zone. There's lots of violence here almost, lots of fighting going on. It's almost as if the ocean is the enemy and the lighthouse is the soldier. Almost two opposing sides here doing combat at the coast. So the writer seems to be suggesting then that Mother Nature is very powerful and has the potential to be very intimidating. The writer seems to also be suggesting that the wind has turned the sea into a violent monster, really, and it is fighting with the land and the lighthouse. So the writer is trying to make this storm almost into a bit like a war, and it's those words that we just saw a minute ago which is constantly reinforcing that to us because it's constantly in the extract from top to bottom. So now that we've put that all together, again, those boxes would be quite important because it's those ideas that students would need to embed in their response. What does a good answer look like? So here we have an example of a response, and if a student could write this, I'd be very, very impressed. It says, the writer uses a pattern of violent and aggressive words which convey the antagonistic and powerful weather. The adjectives sinister, hateful, and explosive all have malevolent and ruthless connotations, which is reinforced when the writer uses the noun plumes to depict the forceful and energetic billowing eruptions of sea spray. Overall, the writer foregrounds the scene as being like a battlefield, where war is raging between the ocean and the land. Plumes of spray could be like plumes of smoke following a bomb scene in war zones. The verbs whistling and shrieked also implies that the setting is full of loud, merciless sounds, both of which could also be words used to describe sounds expected on a battlefield. The writer is suggesting that Mother Nature is intimidating and has the ability to be forceful and brutal, rendering everything else vulnerable and weak. The weather has turned the sea into a monster that is out of control and spiteful. So if any of my students wrote this, I'd be very, very impressed. What makes it effective? Well, we've got the underlined words, which I showed you earlier, the analysis words, which show that the student that wrote this is often, consistent in talking about the effects of language. We've also got the correct use of terminology, adjectives, verbs, and noun. We're quoting from the extract as well, consistently and precisely. And we're also, what I've highlighted there in these kind of pale blue words, we're using vocabulary to talk about the effects, how the weather is conveyed, how the weather conditions are perceived by the reader. And this is often, obviously, what the writer deliberately wanted to do. The writer has deliberately used words for a particular effect, and we've said to the examiner what that effect is. So that is a short but sweet video about language analysis, what a good answer looks like, but also some analysis words. Thank you.